Most people pass it without a thought. Just a clearing of grass, a couple of shelters and amenities tucked by the roadside at Woodford. But this place was once alive with the clang of hammers, the groans of convicts in irons, and the watchful eyes of soldiers. Whispers of hauntings linger in the gully below, and the scars of punishment are said to be carved into the rock itself. What now seems ordinary was once a place of struggle, survival, and stories fading into the distant past. This is Bull's Camp. Behind this name lies a story, one that reaches deeper than the scene suggests, so let me unpack a little bit of history. The winter of 1813 saw three explorers, Gregory Blaxland, William Lawson, and William Charles Wentworth, push westward into the wild country of the Blue Mountains. They were not alone. At their side was James Burns, a seasoned settler who knew the bush and its aboriginal pathways, and with them trudged four convict servants, weary yet essential to the journey. For 3 weeks they hacked and scrambled their way from Emu Ford to the heights of Mount Blaxland, carving a route through country the colonists had long believed impenetrable. At last, from the western edge of the mountains, they gazed across rolling plains, the start of future farmlands that the struggling colony of Sydney so desperately needed. When word of their success reached Governor Lachlan Macquarie, another man was sent to follow in their footsteps. George William Evans, surveyor and explorer, pushed further still. Where Blaxland, Lawson and Wentworth had stopped, Evans pressed on, mapping valleys and rivers, which would be named the Macquarie and Lachlan Rivers. But discovery was only the beginning. A road was needed. In 1814, Macquarie entrusted that task to William Cox, a military officer and magistrate of strict resolve. With a party of 30 convicts and a handful of soldiers, Cox hacked a crude line across the mountains. It was hardly a smooth road, but it was a road nonetheless. In just 4 months, it stretched from Emu Plains to Mount York. 2 months later, it reached the Macquarie River, where the town of Bathurst would grow. 2 Aboriginal men, named Colby and Joe, assisted Cox as guides and translators, plus 8 soldiers guarding supplies and equipment, and ensuring no convict slipped away chasing freedom into the bush. By 1817, the first military outposts dotted the road. The first was built at Springwood to keep communications with the developing township of Bathurst, then at 18 Mile Hollow, today's Bull's Camp, 20 Mile Hollow, today's Woodford, Weatherboard, which would be renamed Wentworth Falls in 1879, Blackheath, and Mount Victoria. These so-called hollows, named for their distance from Emu Ford on the Nepean, became vital resting places, natural water for stock and grass for grazing, later developing with inns and small settlements where weary travellers might rest before facing the road ahead. Though Cox's road was already established, its flaws soon became clear. Wagons jolted and splintered on its steep inclines, horses stumbled, and the road received a lot of criticism from its users. The road was a lifeline, but also a torment. By 1820, Governor Ralph Darling set his sights on something grander. He declared the building of 3 great roads radiating from Sydney, to the north, to the south, and westward across the Blue Mountains. Cox's road would be straightened, widened and made fit, or so the governor hoped, for the transport of goods and produce from the new agricultural areas west of the mountains. And due to their cheap labour, convict gangs were used for construction. 18 Mile Hollow, the site of today's Bulls Camp, was set aside as a stock reserve in 1829. Later, it was used as a camp for convicts who were repairing the road. It then became a location of a convict and military stockade in 1835, one of a series established during the period. Originally, the term stockade was used to refer to a high fence that was built around the convict huts to prevent escapes. However, by 1834, the term stockade had more of a general use, to describe the whole group of buildings constructed on these sites, rather than just the fence. In some stockades, no fence was built at all, and the convicts were housed in huts or portable boxes, which was likely the case at 18 Mile Hollow. Many sites also had barracks for the guards, officers' quarters, storerooms, and a kitchen. Road gang convicts had a miserable existence. Dressed in torn clothing, they were bound by leg irons, ill-fed, maltreated, and poorly housed. They were frequently flogged, even for trivial misdemeanors. If they were to die, they were simply buried anywhere. By the time the Great Roads project was underway, a young Irishman named John Edward Newell Bull was beginning his career far from the mountains. At 14, he entered the military college at Sandhurst in England. Commissioned 5 years later into the 78th Regiment in 1825, then, a year later, became lieutenant when the regiment was transferred to Ceylon, where he met and married Mary Gunn, daughter of the regimental paymaster. After further service and promotion, 36-year-old Bull transferred to the 99th Regiment back in England, and in 1842, he was placed in charge of Irish convicts bound for Hobart Town in Van Diemen's Land, today's Tasmania. Unlike many officers of his time, he was troubled by the brutal treatment of the prisoners. He had their leg irons removed during the voyage, an act that would define his reputation as a humane commander. Later that year, Bull arrived in Sydney with his family. He was soon appointed a magistrate and almost immediately made assistant engineer and superintendent of the road gangs along the Western Road from Emu Plains to Bathurst. In command of about 60 men of his regiment, he established his headquarters at the 18 Mile Hollow Convict Stockade, previously used as a stock reserve. Captain Bull, as he was referred to, was stationed here for 2 years, but mainly lived with his wife and children at the King's Arms Inn, which is still standing today as the Woodford Academy, the area previously named 20 Mile Hollow. It isn't known if the 18 Mile Hollow stockade was fenced, but there were definitely structures there like wooden soldiers' quarters, outbuildings, and offices for Captain Bull. These are said to have been located on the northern part of the site, where today's track road loops around. Unlike some of his predecessors, Captain Bull treated the convicts with much more dignity and humanity. He significantly improved their living conditions, reading sermons to them on Sundays and dismissing the flogger that held a job there for 12 months prior. No more flogging prisoners on Bull's watch. Bull's camp and surrounding area would have been a flurry of activity. Stone was quarried on site to rebuild the road and retaining walls, and trees were cut for building use. That quarry has since filled with water and is the fenced-in waterhole we see today. Unmarked graves of convicts that died during construction are said to be located on the northwestern edge of the site, just up the track in the scrub beyond the grassy area. I have poked around a bit, but understandably there's no sign of graves. An old legend talks about the deep gully below the camp having a reputation of being haunted. The story being that it contained large quantities of bones, the remains of convicts that had been shot and thrown down there into a common grave by their guardians before Captain Bull took control. There are these rocks in the bush that have well-worn letters and possible initials carved into them. Even this one with a series of vertical lines. Are they convict graffiti, or from a time more recent? Much of the folklore surrounding Bull's camp developed early last century. The most notable has to be the flogging stone. Located on the edge of the site is a flat, exposed section of rock displaying a series of parallel carved lines. Legend and current signage has you believe it was the place where prisoners were flogged. Those grooves helped the flogger secure his footing as he plied his punishment, or to drain away the blood of the prisoner being flogged. I'm a little skeptical of those stories. Realistically, they were either on a path to a nearby building and were most likely put there to prevent slipping on the sloping rock surface. Or perhaps they were on the site of a blacksmith's forge, the grooves made to give the anvil a foothold. Nearby is a hollowed-out void in the sandstone, with a clear carved section above its entrance that appears to have held a door of some sort. Another legend has it that this was used as a convict cell, but that doesn't make sense as the stockade used mobile caravans and prisoner boxes. Plus, the natural water that weeps out of the ground on this site has the void constantly filled with water. It was likely built as a storehouse for tools. There's also the legend of Captain Bull's chair and Captain Bull's bath, both of which were meant to be carved into the rocky ridge on the south side of the site. Apparently the captain used the chair to survey the stockade from its elevated position. Supposedly they were both destroyed when the railway went in, but this is unconfirmed. I've scoured the ridge and have found what appears to be a channel carved from the rock, possibly used to allow water to flow or drain down the rock. Could this have fed natural runoff into Bull's bath down below? Right by this channel is what I believe is the legendary Bull's chair. A stone carving of cardinal compass points is said to be in the vicinity, somewhere high on the ridge from where the distant coastline could be seen. Captain John Bull's stint at the stockade lasted just 2 years. In fact, he and most people with it were transferred to the new stockade further up in Blackheath in 1844. Bull's camp became the location of a military stockade which was established to supervise the repairs on the road and to protect travellers from bushrangers in the 1850s when gold was being transported from the central west to Sydney. The camp was again utilised during the railway building phase through the Blue Mountains during the 1860s. A railway construction village developed, more of a handful of buildings, including a police station, an inn and commander's residence. Construction workers also camped there. Today, Bull's Camp sits quietly among the trees, its weathered stones carrying echoes of lives once bound to this place. Convict hardship, military order, whispered legends and community folklore have all left their imprint here. What was once a site of toil, struggle and authority has become a public reserve and rest stop, ordinary on the surface, yet layered with history for those who pause to look closer.